Good evening. This is Tim Ashe, President of the Vermont Senate. It is Sunday, the 29th of March. It seems this is about 2 weeks into really the full-on response to the crisis we've had, and it feels like it's been 2 years. I want to remind people that I'm going to keep doing these updates so long as I feel like I'm able to provide useful information to people. I feel very strongly on my end that it's been very useful because people have been sending me so many questions and ideas for ways that we can be responding to this crisis. It's allowed me to get that information to the governor's team to make sure that we're more quickly responding to pressure points wherever they emerge. So I'm going to keep doing these every day. I have also mentioned that it's somewhat therapeutic even for me because we've all got so much going on in terms of stress about the problems we face, and I can't get to all the communications that come into me over the course of the day. So this is a chance for me to communicate back answers and information that might apply to a lot of the stuff that's coming my way that I don't get to individually respond to every day. So hope you enjoy it. It's been helpful for me, and it's helped serve other people in Vermont because your thoughts and comments have been getting where they need to go. I'm going to begin by saying I had a conversation earlier today with the governor and the Speaker of the House, Mitzi Johnson, and we check in from time to time in general, but obviously that's more important than ever under the conditions we're in right now. And I have no great reveal as a result of that conversation, other than to say that I really do appreciate that the governor is facing extraordinarily stressful decisions day after day after day, and I continue to be very impressed with the measured, thoughtful approach he's making to each decision. Looking back, there will be time for people to say that the governor or the legislature should have done this thing differently or that thing differently, but there's no getting this thing perfectly. It's really making the best judgments with the best information, and I want to commend the governor for the way he's been handling this under very stressful times. Obviously, the Speaker's been a great partner on the legislative side, and it just felt really good to know that while we look at Washington, and even in a crisis like this, there's just so much partisan kind of mechanisms at play, and here people have banded together and focused exclusively on addressing this crisis and putting all the philosophy aside, because keeping people safe and alive is the priority. One of the subjects in our conversation was how we're going to continue to deal with the public's expectations. We are only not that many days into a stay-at-home order. I think it went into effect Wednesday, and the weather's going to get nicer, and people's ability to continue to be at home and not go stir crazy is going to be more challenged. And that's something I believe the governor's press conference tomorrow at 11 is going to focus on, is how do we make sure that people understand that this has got to be a sustained community response to keep people safe, because this is not going to be over in a day or two. It's going to continue to extend out many weeks. One of the questions that I have for the governor and his team is, we see these charts with the number of people who need to be hospitalized or who need serious medical attention, and it's got that big peak, and we're hoping to flatten the curve. But it's also hard to know, when do we expect the peak to occur, and it's important people know that that peak is not occurring yet. It's not going to be tomorrow, and it's not being forecast to be in 1 week. It could be 3 weeks from now. And so however bad the news has been so far, with more than 10 people dying who were infected with COVID-19, and many, many more who have tested positive, and then many others who might have it but haven't been tested, this is not the peak. This is the beginning of the curve starting to go up. And in some ways, the best thing that we could hope for is that a month from now, we never see the curve jump up, and some people will second guess every decision government's made, and we'll say, well, we're glad you're alive to criticize the actions we took. But people have to know that we're in this for the long haul right now, and the inconveniences and disruptions in our life for just a small period of time so far. We have to be ready to ride out many weeks like this. And so with all the uncertainty that brings, whether it's for schooling, whether it's your business, if you're out of work or you're someone whose work has just disappeared, it is critical to know that government is doing everything it can to keep people safe and alive. It's mindful that we need to meet people's basic needs, and not just people who are usually on government programs, but people who now are out of work for all these other reasons. We understand all that. We're doing our best to marshal the resources in a way that will keep people safe. But we have to be ready to ride out a bit of an extended journey together. So urge patience and coming to grips slowly with this new reality for the days ahead of us. I did have two questions that came in I just wanted to touch on. One of them is one that I think is really important for many people who've been contacting me. And this is about sole proprietors and independent contractors taking advantage of the new federal law. The new federal law, as I've mentioned in previous updates, will be providing the equivalent of unemployment compensation to people who haven't typically paid into the Vermont system. So they will be getting a federally funded equivalent of unemployment insurance, plus a $600 a week boost, which Vermont's unemployment system will also be passing on to conventional employees. The law did not get signed by President Trump until Friday night. So some people started to apply for unemployment last week, but our Department of Labor, until they get the official guidance from the federal government, which could be in just the next day or two, was not able to pre-approve people last week. So if you filled out the online forms and you called in and you were told you're not eligible last week, know that that was because they couldn't authorize what the federal government hadn't actually accomplished with their law change. So moving forward, we expect there to be relief for people in the sole proprietor, independent contractor categories, but there will be a little bit of patience, and the system is going to have to adapt quickly to make sure that you get the money that you're entitled to under the federal program. I also received, these are the kinds of emails that are somewhat haunting, and it was the issue, Karen contacted me to say that senior housing facilities that she was aware of struggling to get basic supplies like sanitation supplies. I would really encourage you to contact, I'm not going to punch you off and say call the Emergency Operations Center. I don't think that's really a very helpful way to steer you. If you want to email me directly with the specific facilities that can't get specific items, I can get that information to the Emergency Operations Center. What's as true in a crisis is as true in normal times. Not every person or business or nonprofit or school has the same understanding of how to get their needs heard by those who have the resources to help out. So if you're aware of a facility where people should be getting access to certain supplies but have not received them, the more specific information you get me, I can pass that on to the Public Safety Commissioner and the folks at the Emergency Operations Center. So now I'm going to pivot a little bit and just quickly, I'd like to give something I haven't done in any of the previous updates, but there are some obvious ways that this crisis is impacting the state of Vermont, and most of what we've talked about in these updates have been around getting healthcare services delivered to people, keeping the healthcare providers of all types going in this difficult time, dealing with people who are unemployed suddenly, and then dealing with all the people who fall outside of the normal employment scheme and how they're going to have their bills paid, and then what small businesses are going to get for support. And all those are the critical things in terms of keeping people safe and then sustaining our economy and rebuilding it when we get out of this. But there are many other ways that this crisis is impacting Vermont, and I'm going to briefly walk through some of the ways it affects us in that might not register on the higher level, public radar. And yet are really important for some other people in the way they're experiencing the crisis before us. I'm not going to walk through every single Senate committee and tell you what they're going to be working on this week, but everything I'm about to say are things that Senate committees will be discussing between tomorrow and Friday. And if you go to the legislature's website, you can get all the committee agendas. It will tell you when they're going to be discussing particular topics, It will tell you how you can watch live YouTube video clips, videos of their proceedings as they're happening. Something that most people probably have never done. If you're a geek like me, you watch C-SPAN, but that's the big leagues. But you can actually watch all these committee discussions in real time. You'll see they'll be on effectively Zoom, so you can see the people who are making these decisions and having the discussions. The first area is in education. The school dismissal order, which we're under now, basically, well, for the remainder of the school year, has really made it very difficult to deliver certain special education services. The extra attention or specialized learning tools that might be required to meet a particular student's needs obviously become much more difficult to do that remotely. In addition, there are many students whose needs are met by sending them out of state or outside of the local school district to get unique needs met. So if someone has a very individual challenge in terms of participating in their K through 12 system, they often will go to a program that's outside the school district where there may be others from around the state or even beyond who have that particular challenge. So each school district might not be possible for them to customize it for one student. They send the students elsewhere. Well, now those students are back with their parents. And the question between now and the end of the normal school year is, how do we make sure those students continue to get an effective education, and how do we make sure that by taking them out of their normal pattern of education, they're not losing ground on what they've picked up on. So our education committee is going to be focusing on that. That affects hundreds of students' lives and their families around the state. And it's one of those ones that just sort of drops a little below the public's radar, but it's really important. Our agriculture committee is going to be looking at the issue of farmers markets. So we are right now expecting that changed allowed behavior in terms of markets and everything else, we're possibly looking at a month or more of uncertainty. The question now is, what happens to all the farmers markets, which normally would be up and running when the weather starts turning nice? So our agriculture committee is going to be looking at the network of farmers markets throughout the state and trying to decide whether there is a safe manner in which they can operate, not unlike a supermarket is still operating. Obviously, at the farmers markets, people typically congregate a little bit closer. It's not like you have the ability to throw up plexiglass as simply as you could at a supermarket aisle. People are more likely to be bringing their own containers and things, so it's a little out of the vendor's control. But our agriculture committee will be looking at that. They'll also be looking at the impact this crisis has had on the school meals and farm-to-school programs. Over recent years, we have increased the amount of local food which is going into our K through 12 schools and being served to students, both because it's nutritious, but also as one more educational tool so people can connect to the land around us and really preserve Vermont's heritage. Students are now being delivered school meals remotely. We want to make sure that that is continuing to use as much local produce as possible, and that it doesn't break the bank, and that we provide the support that's necessary. Our Natural Resources Committee is looking at a bit of a wrinkle, which is the ability of our normal waste collection system to continue to operate while we're in this stay-at-home period. We know that some of the larger waste haulers like Casella are dealing with the same staffing problems or challenges that everybody else is. If one worker has to be isolated, they have to find someone else. So they are worried about the ability to continue with their normal operations. The recycling facilities are concerned about their ability to continue under current conditions. If you've never seen one of the all-in-one recycle facilities, people work very closely together to sift out the stuff that is clean and recyclable from the things that people threw in the bins but really wasn't supposed to be there. Compost is another area where compost is not clearly on the governor's list of exempted business operations. So all of the bins that are typically being placed out increasingly on curbsides, what happens to the compost if it's not getting picked up, and how do we deal with just this global problem of, when I say global, I'm referring here in Vermont for the moment, of all the waste that people produce in their normal living, if it's harder and harder for the handlers of that are struggling to staff it up. I typically go to the solid waste district drop-off center on Pine Street in Burlington on the weekends. They have closed that because of staffing challenges. So as the days go by, people's collection of either trash or compost or recycling is going to start building up. Luckily, the recycling operation is still in, but that's something that they're going to be looking at. Our finance committee is going to be talking about what to do about a particularly challenging tax policy, which is, I will run the risk of putting you to sleep possibly, but most people who pay their school taxes based on their income, so about 70% of Vermonters who are homeowners pay based on their income, not based on their property value. However, your tax payment in a given year is based on the income you made in the previous year, because because the way schools are funded, and it's funded in the middle of a tax year, you have to rely on the most recently completed income tax form to base how much we believe someone has the capacity to pay to support our schools. Under normal circumstances, it works okay for most people, but for some people whose income might be volatile over the course of a period of 3 or 4 years, they might have a banner year, and then the next year their taxes are based on the banner year, even though their income might go down, and now they scramble to come up with the money to pay based on a previous ability to pay, which is no longer the truth. Well, now imagine how many people, especially people who, let's say you're an artist, you are a graphic designer, you're someone who is working for yourself. Some years you get a lot of work, some years you don't. Well, many people have had all their contracts dry up overnight. So we're trying to work through how we will set next year's tax bills, knowing that for many people, their income last year bears very little resemblance to what they're going to be reporting this year, and yet they still need to be able to pay the bills. So I can't say that that discussion is going to be the most exciting discussion you've ever had. However, I think when you imagine going to pay your property tax bills, that's when you will know how important the discussion our finance committee this week will be having really is. Our Judiciary Committee is looking at a couple particularly challenging issues. Again, these are below the radar. Our foster care system, there are a lot of issues right now about whether birth parents have the ability under these new conditions to make visitations with the foster home, and with people who share custody and who are obligated under their normal custody arrangement to split the time that the child is or children are in one home versus the other. The question is, with a stay-at-home order, how does that affect both parents, if there are two parents, rights to custody of their children? How do, and I'll just put it in more immediate sense. You have two spouses, former spouses, who share custody 50-50. The kids are with this spouse right now. This spouse may have been exposed to someone who got sick. If this spouse says, well, wait a sec, I don't want you to get your normal 50% custody right now because you might have got sick and we don't want you to infect our children, what happens then? And with the courts closed, it's much more difficult right now to mediate those kinds of disputes. So our Judiciary Committee is going to be looking at that because we have already started receiving complaints and very upset constituent feedback about how this crisis is causing lots of problems both in the foster care setting and also in the shared custody setting. So pretty difficult family dynamics caused by this crisis, and already stressful situations being made even more stressful as a result of what we're facing. And so just another example of something that wouldn't be at the top of your mind but is really, really critical. And then one last one are here's another example of all the things we're having to think about in the short term. Our Government Operations Committee is the committee that handles all of the structures of government at the state and local level. Right now, there is a mandatory retirement age for many in law enforcement. I believe the age is 55, but I might be wrong. And because we have a stay-at-home order and we've shut down many activities, the training facility for law enforcement is actually not operating right now as we understand it. However, over the next month, there will be law enforcement officers around the state who are reaching retirement age and would normally be obligated to not carry out their normal duties. So it's not exactly a time we can afford to have first responders out of commission, and we can't have some leaving without a group replacing them. So we will be, in our Government Operations Committee, looking at whether to for a short period of time, suspend the normal obligation to retire at an age specific for law enforcement, so that we're not starving our law enforcement community at just the time that people, I think, want and need some assurance that we're going to have continuity and safety in our communities. So I'm going to wrap there. Tomorrow is going to be fairly action-packed in terms of next steps as the state as a whole meets the needs in front of us. At 4 o'clock, for those of you who may be interested, the Joint Rules Committee, and again, this you can go to the legislature's website, you'll see the Joint Rules Committee call-in information or YouTube channel to watch. At 4 o'clock, we will have the Health Commissioner on. He will be talking about the revised testing policy that many of you have asked me about, and also about any testing backlog that has built up, because as we know, they've been struggling for the materials and staff capacity to do more testing. So at 4 o'clock, Joint Rules Committee, it'll be done on Zoom. That's what you'll be watching through a YouTube channel. And at 4:30, we'll have the Commissioner of Corrections with the Facilities Manager for Corrections talking about the extent to which they're testing any inmates or staff for infection with COVID-19, what they're doing when people show any symptoms, since it's such close quarters, the risk of a quick spread of infection is very high. So we want to make sure that we better understand that people in our facilities, our correctional facilities, are in the safest possible environment. An outbreak in a prison could spread like wildfire, and we want to do everything we can to avoid it. The last thing I'll say is I have made a commitment. Every day I'm writing a snail mail letter to show gratitude to some person or group who I feel in general times go unnoticed or underappreciated or have their work undervalued. I will be, this time I'll be sending it to the staff at 3 Cathedral Square. I worked at Cathedral Square for many years, and the staff at 3 Cathedral Square are keeping 108 older Vermonters safe. There are about 20 people in assisted living there, and Cathedral Square does amazing work. But I know that the people on the front lines who are doing a lot of the custodial and maintenance work could use a boost. And I encourage others to take the 5 minutes and do such a simple task that will go a long way and build up the endurance and sort of resilience of some of the people who we might be asking to show up in essential functions for many, many weeks to come. So I'm going to sign off. Thanks so much for joining tonight, and I'll see you tomorrow at 5:30.